The honorable member who spoke before me said that our direct tax revenues have increased. Now, these are the numbers I have. I've taken it from budget at a glance. In 2013-14, after about 3-4 years, I think it's about 2009-10, for the first time, direct taxes revenue as a proportion of GDP exceeded the indirect tax revenue. And in 2013-14, when the previous government demitted office and the new government took over, the numbers are 5.6% of GDP was direct tax and 4.4% of GDP was indirect tax. This is progressive taxation. Direct taxes as a proportion increases and indirect taxes as a proportion of GDP decreases. This is the right direction. Now, this direction continued up to 2016-17. In 2016-17, sadly, indirect tax as a proportion of GDP crossed direct tax as a proportion of GDP. And I had cautioned it even then, this is a bad trend, reverse this. Indirect taxes as a proportion of GDP should not cross direct taxes as proportion of GDP. Actually, direct taxes must increase. Now, this year, 2021-22, according to a budget at glance, both have become equal, 5.4% and 5.4%. Next year, the finance minister expects that direct taxes will go up from 5.4 to 5.5, and indirect taxes as a proportion will come down from 5.4 to 5.2, which means we are reversing the bad trend that has been set in the last 5 or 6 years, which is good, and I hope the government achieves this. But, mark this, total of indirect taxes and direct taxes touched 11.2% in 2017-18. This year, it is 10.8%, and next year, it will come down to 10.7%. If your total taxes as a proportion of GDP falls by as much as 0.4% or 0.5%, there is something seriously wrong with your tax policies and tax administration. Taxes as a proportion of GDP are low in India, comparable to other developed countries and other emerging economies. We should increase our taxes as a proportion of GDP, but unfortunately, the trend is not very encouraging. I want to utter the word of caution again, that if your tax as a proportion of GDP does not grow, and if your direct taxes as a proportion of GDP does not grow, it means that people are accumulating income and wealth and not paying enough taxes, whereas the large mass of people who pay indirect taxes are bearing the bulk of the burden. The burden must be shared equitably. People must pay taxes, but the rich must pay more. The people who accumulate wealth must pay more. Last time I spoke on the budget, I did point out how the wealth of the top 1% has increased astronomically by 20 lakh crore in 1 year. So this is a bad trend. This is not a good trend and nothing to be proud about. Then I have another question. According to the budget at a glance, 2021-22, at current prices, the GDP will be 232 lakh crore. In 2022-23, it will be 258 lakh crore. And the budget at a glance correctly calculates nominal growth, underline nominal growth at 11.2%. Now, I want to ask the Honorable Finance Minister, does this estimate of 11.2% growth, which was made on the 1st of February 2022, have you had an opportunity to review it? There is now the Ukraine war. Supply chains have been choked. The shipping rates have gone up astronomically. There is a chip shortage. There is a shortage of containers. there is a shortage of credit. World trade will be affected. And in fact, the IMF has estimated that the GDP of every country will be down between 0.5% to 2%. Now, given all these developments in the last 8 weeks, are you still confident your nominal GDP will indeed grow by 11.2%? I don't wish ill. I wish it grows 11.2%, but I have serious reservations whether in the changed circumstances in the year beginning on 1st of April, it will actually grow at 11.2%. Now, assuming it grows at 11.2%, is the government still persisting with its projection that real GDP growth will be 9.5%, as it was said originally, then revised to 9%, as said subsequently, or as the chief economic advisor has said, 8%. Take any of these numbers. Is real GDP growth next year, will it be 9.5% or 9% or 8%? I think any of these three numbers is no longer credible. And I'll tell you why it's no longer credible. If nominal GDP grows at 11.2, take the smallest of the three numbers, 8%. Real GDP 8%, nominal GDP 11.2. Implied deflator, which is equal to the inflation, will be 3.2. Does anyone believe in the changed circumstances, inflation in India will in 22-23 be only 3.2? If it is 9, implied inflation is only 2.2. If it is 9.5, implied inflation is only 1.7. That will be heaven. That will be heaven. We are not yet at the doors of heaven. I seriously doubt the estimate that India's real GDP will grow at 9% or 8%. And I'll tell you why. In February, WPI was 13.1%. CPI was 6.1%. Food inflation was 5.9%. Manufacturing inflation was 9.8%. And fuel and light inflation, before these 5 days of increase in petrol and diesel prices, was already 8.7%. If food inflation, manufacturing inflation, fuel and light inflation are all close to 6% and above, and if CPI is over 6% and WPI is over 13%, how do you say with a straight face that inflation next year will be about 2 to 3%? These numbers are no longer credible, and I would urge the Honorable Finance Minister, it's not her fault that there is a war in Ukraine, but you must reassess. You must be resilient, you must be nimble, and reassess these growth projection figures and tell us, not today, tell us sometime, tell Parliament, what are the more realistic numbers of nominal growth and real growth. The final point is, I heard the Honorable Finance Minister emphasize once again in the Lok Sabha that this government believes that government capital expenditure will be a main driver of growth. I wish them well. But let's look at the numbers. The numbers are not inspiring. The rhetoric is inspiring, but the numbers are not inspiring. Let me tell you the numbers. In 2021-22, central government capital expenditure in the BE was 5,54,236 crore. In the revised estimate, it was shown as 6,02,711 crore. But actually, that's not the correct number, because there is a small print footnote. The footnote says 51,971 crore was repayment of debt for Air India. That's not capital expenditure. By no method of accounting is a repayment of debt capital expenditure. You deduct that 51,971 The revised estimate of capital expenditure is therefore 5,50,840 crore. The BE was 5,54,000 crore. The revised estimate was 5,50,000 crore. So actually, in the year that is coming to an end on 31st March, you spent 4,000 crore less than what you had estimated. Now, this was a difficult year, and there are many reasons why government capital expenditure never achieves the target that the finance minister or the prime minister or the cabinet decide. There are so many bottlenecks in government expenditure, so many levels of decision making, so much paperwork, and so much hesitancy in clearing projects, be that as it may. For next year, the Honorable Finance Minister has projected a capital expenditure of 7,50,246 crore. We were all very impressed when she read out that number. And she claimed that it is a point to point, it's an increase of 35%. Of course, that proportion is wrong. Whether we apply to the BE of this year or the RE of this year, that proportion is wrong, but I won't get into the arithmetic. The 7,50,246 crore is not a correct number. You have included, I raised this question when I spoke last, and I expect an answer. Have you included, let me rephrase it, have you included in 7,50,246 crore the 1 lakh crore that you will allow the states to borrow additionally for their capital expenditure? That's what the budget speech says. I think you have included, but to be fair and polite, I will not say you have included. I'll turn it around and say and ask it, have you included 1 lakh crore in 7,50,246 crore? If you have included this 1 lakh crore, then this will be counted as capital expenditure by the states if they borrow this 1 lakh and show it in their budgets. How can it be capital expenditure of the states as well as capital expenditure of the center? So if you have included this 1 lakh crore in 7,50,246 crore, my respectful submission is the real number is 6,50,246 crore. Over the current year's revised true estimate of 5,50,840 crore, it is an increase of exactly 1 lakh crore. A 1 lakh crore additional capital expenditure next year. What is it like? It'll be a mosquito bite. Your GDP is 258 lakh crore, in which a 1 lakh crore additional capital expenditure, if it materializes, will make no difference. I'm not saying you should not spend the 1 lakh crore. Please spend this additional 1 lakh crore. But this cannot be the driver of growth. The driver of growth can only be if private investment is the main driver. Household savings, people's savings, channelized into private investment can only be the true driver of economic growth. Government capital expenditure can supplement private capital expenditure, but unless private capital expenditure is stimulated, triggered, boosted, this will not make a difference. In fact, if the GDP, your government capital expenditure is barely 2.52%. 2.52% won't make a difference. We need a much larger investment that can only come from private investment, and private investment can only come if there are private savings, household savings channelized into investment. I want to ask the government finally, have you lost faith in private investors? Or are private investors lost faith in investment in India? They are investing abroad. So somehow there is a lack of faith. Either private investors have lost faith in investing in India, or the government has lost faith in the private investor that they will invest in India. Please go into it. This will not give you the kind of growth we need. We need high growth. I'm cautioning the government once again, respectfully, you will not get 8%, you will not get 9%, you will not get 9.5%. The world is going through a churning. IMF has lowered everybody's growth rate by 0.5 to 2.5. I think we must settle for a lower growth, but we must achieve that lower growth. That lower growth can only be achieved if you encourage private savings, household savings, and find ways to channelize that into private investment. I'm afraid the year ahead is a difficult year. Wish the government well, wish the Honorable Finance Minister well, but it is a difficult year, and it's better be forewarned that it will be a difficult year. It requires sound tax policies, sound financial management, and sound economic management. I wish the government well. Thank you.